what's really going on in our country right now is there's a lot of issues like transgenderism or, during the Biden administration, persecution of Christians or persecution of pro-lifers, that if we don't talk about them, if we don't pay attention to them, who will? That's right. And I think just being really factual and honest about it and informed can make a huge difference, because a lot of the rhetoric that you're referring to is coming from an emotional place or kind of a condescending place. And to meet it with dignity and facts, I think will often come out the winner.
Welcome back to Gen Z Unplugged. We're thrilled to have you guys back with us today. We're going to be doing something a little bit different for the next couple of weeks. We're going to be sharing exclusive conversations straight from Washington, D.C. from our D.C. Summit. These are raw, real, and unfiltered conversations with some of the most inspiring conservative women leaders in today's movement. First off, we have Mary Margaret Olohan, who is the White House correspondent for Daily Wire. She'll be speaking about her experience working in the White House, what the White House press room looks like, and how faith fuels her fight for truth. Hope you guys enjoy.
Thank you so much for coming on Gen Z Unplugged. I have been trying to wrap my head around when I first met you, because I've seen you here and there. And then over the past couple months, you've been blowing up in the news. Young women are absolutely obsessed with your work, which is incredible. We need more classy young women in the conservative movement that are paving the way. So I appreciate you coming on the show today. If you don't mind sharing a little bit about yourself, how you got to working for the Daily Wire and now being a White House correspondent in the media room. What is your story? What sparked this passion inside of you?
Well, thank you so much for having me, you guys. This is lovely. And I love being here at the Claire Booth event. I love these girls. I love talking to everybody about this. So it's so much fun. I first got into journalism when I was probably about 8 months out of college. I was working at Regnery Publishing, which is a conservative publishing house in DC. And I had thought about doing journalism in college, but it really didn't appeal to me that much, just because I had this very liberal professor in college. And when I took this class, she made it seem super dry and boring. And there wasn't anything really interesting about it. Mm-hmm. So I thought, okay, I don't want to do this. But then I graduated and I went to Regnery and I was working at this publishing house, and the Kavanaugh hearings happened. And I was a little bit radicalized, because the way the media was talking about these allegations against the Supreme Court justice, obviously we should take them seriously. And at the time I paid very close attention to Christine Blasey Ford, and I felt a lot of sympathy for her. And I still think she has something horrible happened to her to make her behave in such a way. But I was watching these hearings and I was so disturbed by the way the media was handling it. Because if you remember, there was so many stories coming out of nowhere of all these legacy outlets with anonymous sources claiming these crazy things that you should never publish if you don't have proper verification and a face to the name and confirmation and denials and all these things that were missing in these stories. And it became very apparent to me and to everyone else that this was an attack on the Supreme Court justice in order to prevent him from getting on the Supreme Court and overturning Roe v. Wade, which in fact did end up happening. But all of this was so bizarre to me, and I couldn't believe that the media was handling it in this way. And it inspired me to want to be part of the news rather than reacting to the news. Yeah. So diving into the news cycle myself rather than just waiting for it to happen and being like, oh, look what happened today. And so I took a leap of faith. I applied to the Daily Caller News Foundation. Being a journalist, starting at the very bottom, I took a little bit of a pay cut. I didn't know what I was doing. I very much was like, God, please help this to work out, because I wasn't totally sure how it would go. And it was not easy at first. Being a journalist is very rigorous, especially if you're going to take your beat seriously. When I was first starting out, the Daily Caller is really serious about training you at this fellowship. So the editors will be very hard on you as you learn the ropes. So for example, after a certain period of time, if you make a typo in your headline or in the first sentence of your story, you're told at this stage of the fellowship, if you make these mistakes, your story gets spiked, which means it's not going up. And that really teaches you how to be very on your toes, puts the fear of God in you to make sure your stories are right. And after a couple months of this kind of training, all of a sudden I realized, I can write fast and I'm not making errors. And I'm confident that I'm not making errors because I've worked so hard. And I started realizing I have good news judgment, which is really important for reporting. News judgment meaning like, what's going to be a good story, what's important enough to write about, but what's also going to get clicks and hold people's attention. All of those things are kind of important for covering stories. And at that point, they gave me a beat and they let me pick which one I wanted. I said I wanted to be an abortion reporter, which turned into kind of like a social issues beat. And I started being really aggressive on that beat and writing all these abortion and culture stories. And what I found at the time was that there were not a ton of reporters who were covering these things. And so this was around 2019, 2020. It was when it wasn't really cool to talk about gender issues, abortion. The lawmakers on Capitol Hill would talk about immigration or the economy. And when the March for Life rolled around, they'd all introduce a bunch of pro-life legislation. And then that was it for the year. And it wouldn't go anywhere because the Democrats wouldn't support it. And so when I started writing about these stories and, talking about them in an honest way, unlike legacy media, which at the time would be very dishonest about abortion reporting, they'd be, calling a baby's heartbeat fetal cardiac activity instead of heartbeat. Or, they at one point, they started talking about transgender surgeries for kids and they were calling them gender affirming care, like all these euphemisms designed to confuse people about what we're actually talking about. And so as I started writing about these issues, all these people started coming to me and saying, hey, we have a scoop for you, or we have this exclusive for you, or we want you to come to this event. And I quickly started getting better at my beat and building sources and getting scoops. And from there, things started to take off for me. COVID happened. All I had time to do was write at my parents' house. And so I would just, hang out with my sisters, work out, and then write stories all day. And it was kind of a great time in my life because I just hustled and built more of a following. And from there, I've just continued to do so. And it's to write these stories and tell real lived stories of Americans who have suffered persecution at the hands of different administrations or, are struggling with the culture war issues. And it's been very fulfilling, also stressful at times. And now I'm covering the White House. So it's totally different, a little bit of change of pace, but also very fun. And we're learning so much as we go.
Yeah. Your whole story is so impressive. Like how you got to where you are today, like being a strong, conservative woman in DC is just so impressive.
So sweet.
But what you do now and being a White House correspondent and getting to be in the briefing room and the Oval Office and getting to speak with President Donald Trump, what does a typical day in the life look like for you? I'm sure a lot of people want to know. You're living people's dreams. So just what does a day look like and how does that, work out?
Well, it's a good question. A lot of days are different. And that's one of the things I like about this because I don't know, I have always enjoyed kind of the change of pace, not really knowing what will happen the next day. There's definitely days where I'm like, it would be nice if I could work from home on my couch today. And I get to do that sometimes. But for example, on Monday, I will be in the pool, which means I'm in the White House press pool, which means if there's an event at the White House that the president will allow media at, I get to be in it. So let's say he has an Oval Office meeting with someone and it's open press. That means me and the pool reporters get to go in there and be there and ask them questions, which is fun. I don't think there actually is anything like that on Monday, but we'll see. And so for me on Monday, what I would do is I would get up, I'd probably go for a run. I live near the water and I love it so much. So I love to run on the water. And I live with my sister. So we kind of chat, we make breakfast, and then I get dolled up because you don't know if you're going to be on TV or if you're going to be in the briefing or what you're going to be doing. And then I drive in to the White House. It's nice. I have a parking garage near there. Saves me a lot of stress. And I'll go through security. Obviously, the White House has, all the Secret Service and they have their security. But I have a White House press badge, so I can get in there, which is, I'm still not over that. That's pretty cool to me.
Cool.
Yeah. And then typically on a pool day, it basically means you hang around the White House. You're not supposed to leave just in case anything happens. So let's say that there is an Oval Office event. They'll say over the intercom, press line up at X time. We all get ready. We go stand outside the door. And when they come and let us in, then we all file into the Oval Office and everyone will try and squeeze into the best spot and try and get the best, view of the president. It really kind of depends on the day, but sometimes, you want to be right dead center or you want to be on the end, and he'll look up and down the whole length of the reporters. He typically likes to give every reporter a question. There was one time when I was in there and I was stuck on the end and he never actually looked at me and I was like, ugh. Because there's only so much you can do, right? And everyone's yelling, Mr. President, Mr. President. And it is funny. I've seen videos from behind. It's a little humbling because, you know, if someone takes a video and all these reporters are like begging the president to pay attention to them and everyone's like, Mr. President, it's a little sad. But that's the nature of the game, right? And if you do get a question, that's really exciting because sometimes you're on TV, but also the president is answering your question on TV. And then we'll write it up. Hopefully someone on our team will see it happen in real time. They'll write the question. They'll say that I got it. That's great for our outlet. It's great for, you know, we're excited to make some news. And I think a good example of that is I was in LA 2 weeks ago, I think, with the vice president. And occasionally you'll get in the pool for like a trip or something. So I got invited to go to Los Angeles with the vice president as he went to this federal detention center where the FBI and ICE were having their headquarters out there. And so I flew on Air Force 2 with them that day, and we went there and back in the same day. And I got to ask the vice president questions when he had a press conference. And that kind of thing is cool too, because you never know what will happen. My questions to Vance at that press conference, I said to him, I asked him about Alex Padilla, the lawmaker who rushed his press conference, or rushed Kristi Noem's press conference about ICE a couple weeks ago. And the vice president responded to my question and he called Alex Padilla Jose Padilla. I think he was trying to be funny, but Gavin Newsom was watching. So then Gavin Newsom tweeted a clip that had my question in it and the vice president's response and was like, how dare you call him Jose Padilla? And all of a sudden my question was part of a national argument, and the governor of California was getting mad at the vice president about it. And, you know, all of these other things ensued. And it's just so funny because it all started with my question. So you really never know what the day holds. There's obviously dud days. Like yesterday, I was in the pool. I sat at the White House all day in the press basement desks, and I was just writing other stories and nothing happened. But sometimes it does. And sometimes you get to travel on Air Force One or Air Force Two and make news. And that's really cool.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I've loved looking at the shift with having you guys, especially you, in the press briefing room, asking the questions, especially on the social issues. You mentioned like abortion and gender ideology, which you don't really hear, unfortunately, from many of these legacy media outlets. Even the Supreme Court decisions. I don't think a single legacy media outlet asked Caroline what President Trump's decisions or what his plans moving forward with these Supreme Court decisions were, or his even thoughts were. And so the only kind of like good questions, frankly, that you get are from you guys, the, you know, independent media outlets that are willing to ask this. So I'm curious your thoughts, because I think people are watching it. Like you said, there's crazy. It's a hustle to get in there. You've talked about it a lot. It literally looks like a cafeteria, kind of like kids just like fighting. And I heard you talking to KT earlier about, you know, it's just like this passive aggressive kind of like tension in there. But being in there, asking the questions that nobody else really, even some of the conservative, you know, media outlets aren't willing to ask. How is that for you? I mean, what is it like being in the press briefing room asking questions that you genuinely, maybe you're going to get blacklisted by other parts of the conservative movement, but it's questions that the American people want to hear. Moms, families, parents want to hear.
No, this is a really good question because I don't think people always realize how delicate it is to be a conservative reporter in there, because obviously we have questions that we want to ask, but sometimes they might be questions that, you know, President Trump might not be super excited about. For example, this happened maybe like 2 days ago. A Washington Examiner reporter who I know, Washington Examiner is, most people would consider it a conservative outlet. This guy wanted to ask about the Epstein news recently. And his question was basically, we still have unanswered questions on this topic. Can you elaborate on, I can't remember exactly what he asked, but it was basically asking for elaboration on some of these unanswered Epstein questions. And the president didn't like it. And so then he got kind of mad. And so now that reporter, you know, is all over social media getting sort of yelled at by the president for still asking about that after, you know, amid the flooding in Texas and all these lives are lost and attacks on ICE. The president's point was, we put out what we have. Why are you still asking about that when all these other things are going on? but you can see why the reporter would ask it. You could also see why the president would respond like that. But it's, it can be a little bit dicey. So, people misinterpret questions too. Like I asked a couple months ago, it was the day that ICE put out this video of these illegal immigrants getting deported, and they were violent illegal criminals getting deported, and it was set to the tune of Closing Time. And so the refrain was, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. And the video was kind of amusing. It's a little unsettling too to watch it because it's all these guys in shackles getting on a plane and getting deported. So it's a little unsettling, but I think, it's one of those things where like Americans are very ready for this to happen. They want to see it happening. So I think the White House kind of astutely said, let's show them that it's happening to help them realize we're keeping our promises. And so when these videos came out, everyone was, reacting to them. And there was a briefing that day. So I said to my bosses, I want to ask about them because this is a big deal and it's causing a lot of stir. And I think the White House, I'd like to hear them explain what their point of the videos are. I think that's a totally legitimate question. So I asked, and Caroline had a really interesting answer. And she kind of concluded with, our messaging is very clear. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. And we made a little reel out of that and put it on social media. And it's funny because you look at the comments, all the people are like, oh, that liberal reporter, or like, oh, that idiot reporter, why is she asking that? And I was like, come on, you guys, like, this is a legitimate question. And I got you this interesting answer. Like, you should be happy with this. But there's definitely an attitude of, oh, anyone asking a question is, to be shamed. So people misinterpret, people don't understand. At the end of the day, I'm just happy if people know I'm doing my job and my bosses know that we're trying to ask questions that our audience cares about. Yeah. And I think Caroline is pretty clear in understanding who's asking questions in good faith or bad faith. And you can tell that by the way she responds.
Yeah. And like with backlash that you do receive from just doing your job and wanting answers and wanting the truth, how do you deal with that? Like, how do you respond when people accuse you of, not being Christian, not being conservative, when you're just trying to give them the truth, like what actually is happening?
I just don't respond. I'm the oldest sister in my family, so I'm definitely way too comfortable being bossy. And then when people annoy me, I just like, I'm like, whatever. So especially on social media, if I see people being annoying, I don't engage with it. Yeah. We don't engage with terrorists, right? or commentators. And I typically try not to read the replies too much. I tell this to my mom all the time. I'm like, you better not be reading the replies because those are the kind of things that can make you upset. But I will say for the most part, I receive a lot of good feedback. Our audience is so excited that we're there. They are so supportive and so sweet. And, it's surprising how many people will recognize you or figure out that you're the one asking the questions in the briefing. So I'd say there's a good mix of responses. And my favorite so far, someone sent this to me the other day. It was a TikTok of some girl. I don't know who she is. She's liberal. She has a big account. She makes fun of the briefings. And in her video about the briefings, she was making fun of me. And she was like, who is this girl that keeps asking these stupid questions? And she was upset because I was asking about ICE. And I was like, hey, if you're upset about this, it's probably a good thing. So it's fun. It's silly. So
yeah, that's right. And I think it's interesting you mentioned just like the hate. And I think that's a lot of young people, a lot of young girls are afraid to stand up because of the hate. And I'm curious, you mentioned, just not responding, but I think also too, being willing to just be like, hey, like, let's get back to the point. Like, you're deflecting from the real issue that's at hand. I remember when I first got involved, we were hosting a Teens Against Gender Mutilation rally with Chloe Cole and Turning Point USA. Yeah. And we were at a college campus, and I was about 15 at the time, and you'd hear people come up, what are your thoughts on circumcision? Yeah. So you're against child mutilation. Oh, and they use all these very deflective tactics to get you away from the point because they don't care about circumcision. That's not the point. Yeah. They just want to normalize child castration and mutilation of children. So I'm curious, you kind of gave your message, like, don't look at the comments. Encourage your parents also not to because they're going to freak out. But I mean, what is your message to young women, especially on these college campuses, or maybe just even at their churches that are getting pushed back from conservative Christians that said, don't get involved in politics. Like, this is not for you. You're getting into a very messy field. All those very, really just deflective tactics.
No, I think that's a really important thing to talk about. And I will say, I don't have a ton of patience for that kind of rhetoric because, especially as a reporter, I care a lot about the facts. I care about the truth. And so when someone comes at me with things like that, especially on the gender issue, my immediate response is to be like, okay, well, do you know anyone who's tried to transition? Do you know anyone that's happy with their transition? They'll probably say, yes, I do. I know many people, whatever. Do you know anyone that's unhappy with their detransition or unhappy with what happened? And then share a real story about what you've heard or what that person has experienced, because it's much harder for them to argue with the real lived experiences of someone who was impacted by this. And then let's say, you're at church and someone's saying it's weird it's not good to be too involved in politics, or I don't know, that it's not good for women to be too involved in politics. Those kind of things, I think it's good to take them very emotionlessly and just talk about, well, like, what's really going on in our country right now is there's a lot of issues like transgenderism or, during the Biden administration, persecution of Christians or persecution of pro-lifers, that if we don't talk about them, if we don't pay attention to them, who will? That's right. And I think just being really factual and honest about it and informed can make a huge difference, because a lot of the rhetoric that you're referring to is coming from an emotional place or kind of a condescending place. And to meet it with dignity and facts, I think will often come out the winner. And I know on college campuses it's different now, and there's a lot of informed young people. Actually, I would say a lot of Gen Z is pretty well informed from TikTok. But if you push more than the surface level and go beyond into some of these real stories, I think you'll have a lot of success. That's right. Most people will.
And I know you've mentioned before when you spoke just prior to this at our DC Student Summit, you mentioned how important your faith and your education and being homeschooled, which is such a stigma nowadays, is that you're weird and awkward. And, being a homeschooler myself and Catholic, I definitely felt that as well. How impactful, just to share with everyone, was your faith in, you work so hard. Your work ethic is incredible. You're dedicated to what you do. And do you think that is a result of your education, your homeschooling, and your faith?
Absolutely. My faith is the reason for most of what I do. I'm a serious Catholic, and I think I was sharing at the summit earlier, I've never regretted prioritizing my faith, and I've never suffered for prioritizing my faith professionally. And, it can be as simple as like yesterday, I went to Mass during they call a lid at the White House. So like a lunch lid, which means nothing's going to happen from 11:30 to 12:30. So I rushed out to go to Mass, and I had a story I was working on, and I was like, oh my gosh, I hope that I don't get scooped while I'm at Mass. And then, maybe I would someday, but I did not get scooped yesterday. And I firmly believe it's because I'm not going to be punished for prioritizing my faith and for making time for God during the day. And I swear, like Catholics, we say the rosary, and every time I say the rosary, I have a better day. Every time I put my faith first, I do. So it's just very important to me. And I think growing up, our faith informed a lot of the way we looked at certain issues. So if you're a Christian, you're going to have, if you're a Christian who's well informed, you're going to look at issues like transgenderism and marriage and life and dignity, whether it's euthanasia or abortion. You're going to have a very practical view on these issues because it's very black and white to us, right? There's not a lot up for discussion when it comes to ending the life of a baby or cutting off the breasts of a healthy girl. Like, these are very black and white issues to us. And so, growing up in a Catholic family and talking about these issues in an appropriate way at the appropriate age was really formational for me. And, my mom and dad are very interested in all these topics as well. So that was really helpful. And then I think being homeschooled was really important too, because not only did it make me a really good reader and writer, but we also would talk about why we were homeschooled, why my mom preferred to have us there and not in public school. And, she used to be a social worker, so she was aware of some of these pitfalls of some of the different government-run institutions or state-run schools and things like that. So that all was really foundational to my upbringing. And so when it came time to write stories, I'm ready to look critically at public sex education, and I'm ready to look critically at, the transgender medical industry. When COVID came around, I was ready to look critically at everything because I don't like being told what to do. And I think that a little bit of that is good, healthy as well. So all of it is really important. And I think, at the end of the day, the people I respect the most in the political sphere are people of faith who are very principled. I'm not saying of a specific faith either, just people who adhere to their faith and are very principled and are acting out of love of their country and desire to serve God. And those are the people that I respect the most.
That's really good. I'm glad you mentioned the why. My mom was actually a social worker too, which is kind of funny.
Way.
But yeah,
that's so funny.
I guess we're all three were homeschooled, and I think for the listeners, I always tell people like homeschool your kids. It is the best option. I mean, there's alternatives you can do, like co-ops if you can't do 5 days a week homeschool. But and even if your kids are homeschooled, they don't have to do school 5 days a week. And this is what my dad says: everyone is homeschooling their kids. Either you do it the smart way and you do it 2 to 3 hours a day, or you do 7 hours in person and you come home and do more homework, right?
Great point. That's a great point.
But you mentioned knowing your why. Why were you homeschooled? And I really believe the reason why so many young people go off to college and they lose their entire moral compass is because they didn't know the why behind what they believe in.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, just your message to young people in this day and age, your message to young women, but also your message to parents, because I really think the way that we're going to turn this ship around is parents showing their kids what it means to be a truth seeker.
Yeah. And I feel silly sometimes because I don't have kids, but to give messaging to parents, but I will say I did grow up with a lot of them and I have really good parents. I'm the oldest girl in a family of 11 kids, so I helped raise a bunch of them. And what I will say that I learned from writing my book too about young women who tried to transition is that the importance of both parents being present and being really tuned into your life. It's just, it cannot be overstated enough. That and not giving your kids phones. You can save your kids so much heartache and so much sadness if you just hold the line and don't give your kids a phone until they're old enough to be driving. I think that's a very reasonable time to wait. Maybe they need a flip phone in that interim. Maybe they need a phone that has like very serious safeguards on it so they can't go on the internet, but do not give your kids phones where they can go upstairs and shut the door and be alone with the internet. And it's not just like, someone in the transgender world is going to prey on them. That might happen, and it does happen a lot. But some of these girls that I talked to for my book, it was the representations of womanhood that they were seeing online that really messed with them. And I'll share this briefly, but this is something I always talk about when I talk about my book. Chloe Cole, for example, Prisha Mosley, these two detransitioners. I was just looking at my book yesterday because I was writing something on this topic. They both were exposed to pornography at really young ages. And we know this is so common now, for boys especially, but also for girls. And those representations of female sexuality freaks them out because obviously hardcore pornography is going to freak out any child. But just for a woman to see women degraded and humiliated the way they are in pornography, that's really, really detrimental to your view of sex and sexuality. That's really, really hard. And then on the other hand, you see all these representations of womanhood on Instagram where every woman is perfect. She's not only really good at makeup and hair and her outfits are perfect and she gets unlimited free stuff from all of these, stores that are sending her things, which these kids don't know. They just think she has unlimited beautiful things. And then she's off on some exotic vacation and all these men are commenting to a young girl like Chloe. She's looking at that and thinking, that's what a woman is supposed to be. But I'm not that, and I don't look like that, and I don't know how to look like that, and I don't have the money for any of these things. And then she's looking at how women are portrayed in pornography and thinking, I don't want anything like that. So when you combine that, it's no surprise that all these girls are suffering from wanting to be a man or wanting to get away from womanhood. And also a lot of these detransitioners were sexually assaulted when they were young girls. So all of these things stacked on each other makes so much sense why so many girls are afraid to be a woman and to, be a flourishing woman who's not afraid to live a life like that. And so I think, we need to be really aware of these things. As an adult woman, I try and be aware. I have so many younger girls following me. When I post on Instagram, I want to be someone that is not trying to be unattainable. I want to be someone that is hardworking and is loves her family and is there for all of these things, not just someone that has like a perfect seeming life. And I think we all need to keep that in mind on social media. But parents especially need to be aware this kind of thing is really hurting kids' brains, and it's not good for them. Even the repetition of reels or TikToks, I was just joking about this at the summit, that's so bad for your brain. That messes up with your concentration so much. I've known people that have gotten off TikTok and suddenly were so much more cognizant at work or were able to study better. And all of these things are so detrimental. So I would just say we need strong fathers in our daughters and sons' lives. And we need present mothers who aren't afraid to be the bad guy. It's okay to not give your kid a phone. It's okay for them to not feel very cool. I didn't feel cool for a long time. I still don't feel that cool. And it's fine. You know, it's a good thing. If it's helping their soul and it's helping them to be a strong, independent woman someday, good. It's okay for them to lack a little in that area. And I also think, you know, in writing my book, I noticed there's so many young people who didn't play sports or didn't practice a faith or didn't have a strong family life. And all of these things contribute to some of the mental health problems that kids are suffering with today. We need to be active. We need to be involved in communities. We need to be practicing a faith and seeing our parents practicing a faith, even if it's just for your kids. So I could go on and on, but those are some of the things that come to mind when you ask that.
Yeah. And also what you were saying about social media, it gives this like false reality to girls seeing that and a false sense of what a family looks like or a relationship looks like. I know so many people in my own life who have said, you know, they're looking for this ideal TikTok relationship. And if they don't check every single box that all these TikTokers, show in their fake best world, you want to portray yourself on camera. It's not really like that in the real world. So I know so many relationships that just, they can't enter into anything with a guy or girl because it's not what, Instagram and TikTok is showing. So that's very interesting what you put up about. It's so important, with phones and social media and parents being involved in an aspect of kids' lives because that will really mess with their mind and affect them for the rest of their life.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, especially Gen Z, I would argue, has really been raised with these notions of relationships that are very manicured and perfect for social media. And I think that's part of the reason why it's hard for, people joke about how you can't get past the 3-month mark. A lot of these couples, or even the 1-month mark, or there's a lot of talk about situationships and people not committing. We should be promoting ideals of real marriage and lasting, loving relationships. And less of this perfect TikTok manicured, these videos. I'm not big on TikTok. I'm starting to be on there for my job, but I see some of this content and I'm like, this is why everyone struggles. It makes me so angry.
Well, and it's interesting, not to keep this going, but I think this is so important because I think as women, we're always easy to say men shouldn't watch pornography, but then while we're over here watching these, and I haven't seen all of the show Love Island or whatever, but I've seen commercials. And I remember being on an airplane with someone, I looked over and she's like, don't look at my phone. Like, this is what I'm watching. And I didn't know what it was because it was like 16 or 17. And I told my mom and my dad, and they're like, don't engage with that. But it's like, this is the kind of stuff. And these books, they're publishing all of these books right now. And it's book pornography, literally. And as women, we are like you said, creating this very distorted idea of what a relationship, and this is what happens when you get out of God's perfect design for marriage and mankind. Like, you're going to see the consequences of it.
No, that's a really good point. And I think that there's not enough conversation these days about what it means to be in a good relationship. I think a lot of the time people just act like if you're monogamous, then everything's fine. And maybe that's more of a secular conversation, right? If monogamy is preferable to hookup culture, for sure. But I think a lot of girls, and probably a lot of your listeners, know that they will be happier if they're not living with someone before they get married, for example. That is a smarter decision than living with someone before you do get married. There's so many choices that, you could talk about it from a religious perspective, but just from a secular perspective, you're going to be much happier if you're not hooking up with all these guys when you're dating, because you're protecting yourself and you're protecting your heart. And from a secular perspective as well, you're going to be healthier probably and more safe than if you're hooking up with all these guys along the way. So I personally think that it's a good thing to have conversations with young women about relationships and waiting for marriage, for example, talking about all these things and helping them understand the best way to protect their heart and to live a life in accord with their religious principles. And I think we need to talk about that more.
Yeah. I know we just have a couple minutes left before we have to wrap up, but what is one piece of advice that someone has given you throughout your career, or maybe from your parents, something like that, where it really stuck with you, made you the person you are today, and would you want to share that with the Gen Z out there, which might be able to help them in their career?
That's a really good idea. Or a good point. I would say there was a time a couple years ago when I was with the Caller. It was a while ago, actually. And I was writing about Pope Francis, actually. I got assigned to write this story. He had said something, and I don't remember what it was, but it wasn't great. And it was confusing because it was something that the liberal media was getting very excited about, and they were promoting it, and I was nervous. So I texted my dad, and I was like, Dad, I don't know. I don't know if I should write about this. It makes me really uncomfortable. I don't want to die someday and have God be like, why did you say this about the Pope? It's something like that. And my dad texted me back, and he was like, the truth will set you free. Focus on that. The truth will set you free. And so he encouraged me to just write the story factually and accurately and tell the truth. And I did that. And that's really stayed with me because I think, in my line of work, it can be very confusing about what you should or shouldn't say, or what should be reported, or what you should be focusing on. And I really do believe that we should be focused on the truth, that there's not enough transparency these days. There's not enough focus on the real factual truth of what's going on in our country. And that is what Americans are craving. And almost 100% of the time, it's the right thing to do. The truth will set you free. And so that's something that's really stayed with me. And I also really like this quote from St. Catherine of Siena, which I have taped to my mirror. She says, nothing great is ever achieved without much enduring. And I think that's really important for us to remember too, is that we must hustle and we must work hard for what we want. And truly at the end of the day, if we put in that work and we put in that time and devotion, I think we will get what we want. And we will achieve greatness.
That's right.
Yeah.
Amen. Now, do people call you Mary or Mary Margaret?
Mary Margaret. Also
Mary
MMO.
Margaret. Okay. MO. I love MMO. Okay, I love that. Well, how can people find you? How can they support your work and see what you're doing?
So you can follow me on all social platforms. Unfortunately, I'm on all of them. Mary Margaret Olohan on Instagram, Mary Marg Olohan on X or Twitter. And I believe MMO on TikTok now, which is crazy. And you can find my work at dailywire.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.